Well, welcome everybody. Looks like we've got a pretty full house, so I'm going to get started. Kind of as always, I thank you for being here. Hopefully you're going to find this topic as exciting as we do. And we've got a special guest here that I'll be introducing in just a little bit as I hand it over to Ricardo, who's going to be doing a demo about halfway through our presentation to kind of give you a better sense of what we're looking at today. But again, thank you for being here. As usual, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. I will do my best to pay attention to that. And then we, of course, will leave time at the end of the presentation to review any additional questions that anybody may have. So without any further ado, let me go ahead and just jump right in. So for anybody who doesn't know why they're here, what we're here today to talk about is the idea of using Microsoft Teams as your phone system. And we're going to explore that from a couple different perspectives. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll actually show you a demo of what that looks like so you can get a better sense of that as well. Before we dive too far into that topic, just a couple of quick slides about Paragus for anybody who isn't familiar with our firm. We are a 50-person employee-owned company located in Hadley, Massachusetts, and we serve clients all over Western and Central Massachusetts, helping their businesses manage, take care of, and secure their IT services. And the core purpose behind what we do, the thing that drives all of our staff, all of our decisions, all of our service offerings, is this idea of making IT fun. And that's a large part of why we are excited about this process and this particular technology, is it really enables us to use technology in a way that is more seamless, more accessible, less expensive, and simplifies our our ability to communicate both when we're in the office, out of the office, remote, and wherever we are. And that's what we're always trying to look for. We're looking for technologies that makes it easier to do our jobs and enables us to be more efficient, more productive, more mobile, whatever it is we're trying to achieve. For those who aren't familiar, Paragus is broken into 4 distinct departments. We have one department that focuses on providing on-demand support. That's the largest department in our company, and we have about 35 people there who are ready to help out with whatever's going on in the given moment. Our second department focuses on security and compliance. Our third is all about providing strategic planning and strategic assistance. And our fourth division, which is our newest division, is focused on providing business automation, improving efficiency through better use of technology. Now, I do need to address the elephant in the room, so to speak, which is why are we having a meeting about Teams on Zoom? It's a good question. And the reason is that Teams does have a lot of powerful features, as we're going to be talking about today and exploring, but it doesn't mean that necessarily one platform is the end-all be-all. I still personally have found that for large group meetings with external participants, Zoom probably is a slightly better platform. Now, that being said, check in with me again in 6 months, and I might feel differently because Microsoft's technology innovation has been so significant and so rapid that it is quite possible that they do continue to evolve to a place where it is on par or better than. But just because Zoom may have this good use case doesn't mean that across the board, Zoom is the better solution. And we'll explore that later today as we talk more about Teams and how we can better use it. So I think the first thing that brings us together is just this right here. In an incredibly short amount of time, Microsoft Teams has 75 million users. And obviously, this was taking off well before the pandemic hit. But as you can imagine, through the pandemic, this number has skyrocketed even further. And not only is the number of active users going way up, but the number of engaged users who are using Teams on a constant basis every single day has also gone way up. And the reason for that is it provides so many different features and solutions. It isn't one product. It's really a great way to bridge the gap between several great products, use cases, and needs within a business. And part of the reason it has become so popular is because it's deep integration within the Microsoft Office 365 family. Whether you're using it for just a couple of these features or you're really taking advantage of all of the different features within the 365 ecosystem, Teams is a great platform that provides a lot of connectivity between all these different avenues. For those of you who aren't super familiar, you can be storing a lot of your data in SharePoint, but accessing it through Teams. So Teams can be the way that you get access to all the files and folders that you're sharing. Teams can be the way that you communicate and collaborate with coworkers. Teams can be the way that you have internal meetings and even external meetings. Teams can be the way that you store and organize information around a project, a client, a business need, a business use case. It really provides us this fabric that we can use to connect and string together all of the other parts of 365, and most importantly, all of our data that's in our email, our Excel spreadsheets, our Word documents, all of that information, and bringing it together into one place. And this ecosystem is just constantly expanding and growing and getting better and better. And one of the things that we're going to talk about today is the voice element of that ecosystem and how that plays into the rest of this conversation. So fundamentally, when we talk about Teams and we talk about why it's here, it solves a lot of our business use cases. It provides us the opportunities to have calls and meetings internally and externally. It provides us the ability to chat in real time, and as a result, save a lot of time on internal emails and internal meetings and other ways of communication. It allows us to communicate and collaborate. For example, if we're working collaboratively on a document, we can host that in Teams. We can be notified in real time when changes are being made. It provides us this incredible way to just stay connected and be very efficient when it comes to working within an organization. And then, as I mentioned earlier, it has this seamless integration with Microsoft 365. So I'm talking a lot about Teams, and my goal for today wasn't to tell you why you should be using Teams. Kind of the expectation is that most of you are probably already using Teams or are already interested in using Teams. What we really want to dive into today, however, is if I'm going to be using Teams for all of these other reasons that we already agree have tremendous value to my organization, are going to make my company more efficient, are going to improve my communication and collaboration, are going to let me work from anywhere, well, then why would I not want to layer into that strategy and that solution the idea of making voice phone calls? And specifically, when we're talking about voice phone calls in this context, we mean traditional dialed phone numbers. So replacing your phone system that you would use to make a 10-digit dial to an external phone number. We obviously are already using voice when it comes to doing internal phone calls with coworkers and external video meetings. But this is filling in that one missing piece, which is the dialed phone. And so many of you are probably still using devices like this. In fact, I still have one sitting on my desk, although I cannot think of the last time that I actually picked up the receiver and used it. And that's kind of the point, is through the pandemic, what a lot of us found is that we had to do a number of our phone calls, in most cases, the majority of them, using headsets and laptops and computers. We got very accustomed to this idea of having conversations using either our cell phone or our computer to be the host of that conversation. So the point that we're really trying to make is if we're going to be doing that, if I'm going to be having this headset and I'm going to be used to using video calls and audio calls, and I'm going to be doing that on a constant basis, why would I also want this second device sitting on my desk that I have to use occasionally to make these more traditional kind of legacy phone calls? And the point is we don't. We can totally get rid of that system and just use the one system at all times. And there may be people who do want to use this traditional desk phone, although I think what you're going to find is most people's experience either looks like this, using a headset paired with a laptop, or just using their mobile device and making and receiving phone calls on their actual phone. However, even for the traditionalists that like the idea of having a desk phone, we can still have a Microsoft Teams desk phone so that we are still on one platform. We have one system to manage, one place to get our communication and information. They even have very beautiful conference room solutions that allow us to take our conference rooms and make them much more engaged, improve that video audio experience, and integrate all of that into one system and platform. And so at this point, really what I'm challenging each of you to think about is why would you want to continue to juggle two different systems? Having two different ways for people to reach you, two different voicemail boxes you have to keep track of and manage, two different systems to try to figure out when you're going to be out of the office or working remotely and get access to and have things forwarded to. Trying to avoid that thing where you're giving people your cell phone number or returning calls on your cell phone and your cell phone is showing up on their caller ID instead of the company's phone number. Trying to participate in route groups. Why would we want all of that complexity? Not to mention, why would we want to pay two different bills? Why would we want to be paying for Microsoft 365 and then also be separately paying for a phone system, and especially a phone system that has a capital expense associated with it that we have to spend every 4 to 5 years? That can be quite expensive. And so the point is that with all the pressure on all of our businesses right now, between the very tight labor market, the juggling more variables and demands than ever, this complex world where we're trying to deal with hybrid employees working in the office and working remotely, with all the competition, both locally and globally, every incentive in the world right now is for us to try to make things as simple and easy as possible. The simpler we can make our businesses to run, the simpler we can set up our technology, the more efficient we're going to be and the more able we're going to be to keep up with and tackle all of these challenges that face us in business right now. And so the proposal that I would make to each of you is that setting up Teams as your voice system is kind of like giving yourself a gift. It's one less thing to manage, one less thing that you have to purchase, one less thing that could go wrong and ruin your day, and one less thing that you have to try and figure out how you're going to handle in a remote, in-person, hybrid environment. It really is about simplification and making your life and your business easier to run and administer. And so with that introduction, I'm going to hand it over to Ricardo, who is going to give us a demo of exactly what all this looks like.
Thank you, Delcy. I think the screen sharing is disabled. You could just turn it on.
Yeah. I will hand it over to you right now. All right, you should be good to go. Okay,
great. Hi, everybody. My name is Ricardo, and I appreciate your time today. My intent is to give you an introduction to Teams as a phone system. The demo is going to take probably about 15 minutes, so we'll have lots of time for questions. And I'm just going to walk you through the user experience with Teams as a phone system. So Delcy's absolutely right. The value proposition of, pulling telephony into Teams makes a tremendous amount of sense. So Teams today has become, the best workforce productivity application in the market. And Microsoft is doing everything they can to keep the knowledge worker within Teams as much as possible for as many things as possible all day long. And so you can see it, they have this relentless pursuit for adding productivity tools to the product. And so it can do all the things that Delcy mentioned: chat, email, calendar. You can already screen share, host meetings. And so so pulling telephony into the application is just one more thing that you can do. Makes a tremendous amount of sense from the user's perspective. It brings a lot of simplicity. It's a single pane of glass experience, one application. And Microsoft is trying to create this front door into your organization where the knowledge worker enters through Teams. And so what I'm hoping to show you today is the user experience. I'm going to show you where the settings are, where the users can configure a variety of settings. And then I'll take you through what the call application looks like. And then finally we'll place a live call. And then we'll answer your questions. So for an organization, especially that's already been using Teams, the leap for the user migrating to Teams as a phone system is incredibly short. It's just one, they're already making calls internally. You're already screen sharing. The only difference is that they'll get this dial pad and they can place calls external to the organization, and they can be added to the auto attendant to receive calls. So you're really just talking about, Teams to Teams globally is free. I can call anybody on Teams today for free. I don't need this license to access the dial pad. But if I have it, it means that I can now call somebody's office line or their cell phone, or they can call me, get a suite of voicemail and a variety of functions, which we'll go through. So let's go ahead and take a look at the user settings. So the first thing we would do in your organization during training is we would ask the users to set Teams up for themselves. And so let's go into Manage Account. I'm going to walk you through the different settings that pertain to voice. I'm going to skip the others. And the first one that's noteworthy is delegation. Delegation may or may not be relevant to your organization, but the typical use case would be that an executive has an admin that supports them, and they're able to make or receive calls on their behalf as their proxy. So if I were supporting anybody, this tab would show me the people that I support, and then this tab is going to show me my delegates. So Teams allows you to do up to 25 users in the environment. Ad hoc, I can add them. And then now this user, Nate, is now able to make or receive calls on my behalf. Okay. Delegation may or may not be relevant to your organization, but sometimes shared line appearance is, and this will turn that on. So shared line appearance gives you insight into the user's call activity. So Nate, as my delegate, if he were on the phone, I'd be able to see who he's talking to, how long he's been talking to, and I would have a lot of insight into their phone activity when they're on the phone. You can go to privacy. The first one is do not disturb. Pulling telephony into Microsoft Teams gives you all of that Office 365 integration. And as a result, you're going to get some enhanced presence-based settings that you wouldn't get necessarily if telecommunications was a silo. So for example, you're going to get, Teams will dynamically change your presence. If you're on a call, it'll say, busy, the person's on a call, but all phone systems will be able to do that. But then it'll say in a meeting. So for example, right now you're not on the phone, but you're in a meeting, and so you're not available. So Teams will see into your calendar. It'll see that you're supposed to be in a meeting, and your presence will dynamically change to a meeting. Then take it one step further. If you're presenting, Teams will dynamically change and say that the user is presenting, right? So the nuance between presenting and in a meeting is if I'm presenting, my ability to multitask and maybe check an internal chat is nil. I won't be able to because everybody can see my screen. So it gives you a lot enhanced presence, but you can also manually change your presence. And one of the options is do not disturb. And so if you go on D&D, it's going to block all banners, chats, notifications, and it's going to send all calls to voicemail. This is the setting where you would be able to manage priority access. So you could say, when I go on D&D, I want every call to go to voicemail, except for these users. And you can also add a landline or a cell phone. So maybe you have an important client that if they're trying to reach you, you need to be able to make sure they can get to you. This is where you would carve out their priority access, and they would bypass the D&D. Great. You can block all calls with no caller ID. Also, any calls that you've blocked will show up here in a list. So you can unblock them. You can block and unblock the calls from the call history as well. There's a ton of notification preferences. I'm not going to spend any time on them, but just know they're there. But the majority of the call settings for the user are going to happen here at the bottom in the calls tab. The first thing you would do as a new phone system user is you would configure the call answering rules. This is where you're going to configure things like find me, follow me, try me on my Teams phone after 30 seconds. If I don't answer, roll to my cell phone or roll to some other number or roll to somebody on my team. Or you could do simultaneous ring, calls ring me. I also want them to ring my delegate or my cell phone or my house phone or a call group. So Teams gives users the ability to establish their own call groups, not to be conflated with a call queue. So a call queue would be created in the auto attendant, and that would not be able to be tampered by a user. That would be configured at the administrative level. But users can create call groups within their own sphere of influence. So I'll give you a use case. Let's say I'm in accounts payable and there's 3 of us in my department and a vendor calls. I could configure Teams so that if I'm unavailable, that it rolls to one of my peers, because if a vendor calls, any one of us in the department could perfectly, answer their question. So as a user, I can create my own call group and I could add, additional users. And then I could have the phone ring either sequentially or simultaneously on the call group. So let's go ahead and keep configuring calls ring me. I don't want it to ring anybody else. I want it to ring for 40 seconds. And then if I don't answer, I want it to go to my voicemail. Great. Now let's go configure the voicemail. Configure voicemail. There's 2 ways to configure a greeting in Teams. The first way is you can record a greeting and use your voice, follow the prompts. It'll upload the recording. The alternative way is to use what's called text-to-speech, which is my preference. And Teams gives you 2 options for text-to-speech. I could have 2 greetings. So what's nice about it is you can just type out the greeting, and then Teams, through their computer voice AI, will actually say the greeting for you. and it gives you the ability to have two greetings. You could have your everyday greeting, and then you could have a greeting, for example, when you're on PTO. And what I like about it is, again, highlighting that integration within Office 365 is I can link that alternative greeting to my Outlook. So meaning if I go to my Outlook and I turn my out of office replies on my email, it will know that I'm out of the office and it will automatically roll to my alternative voicemail. Once you've set your greeting, you have to pick, there's additional call answering rules when a caller gets to your voicemail that you can pick from. There's 5. Let the caller record a message, or you can enhance that to giving them the option to be transferred to somebody else. I could end the call without playing the greeting. I could play the greeting and end the call, or I could force the transfer. In this particular case, I'm going to go ahead and leave it with giving the caller the option to leave a message or be transferred to, and I'm going to go ahead and pick Nate in the organization. Microsoft has, I think, over 50 languages that are native to it. So you could automatically change and translate languages based on the default settings. I'm gonna go ahead and leave English and get out of there. So great. As a user, I've told Teams how I want to receive my phone calls. I've configured my voicemail, and now it's time to configure my ringtone. So there's a variety of ringtones. There's a drop down. Select the ringtone. If you hit the triangle, it'll play it for you. Doesn't really matter what your ringtone is. I generally recommend a distinct ringtone depending on the call type. Accessibility, this is an interesting feature. This is intended for the hearing impaired. If you turn on TTY mode when you're on the phone, it'll give you the option to live caption the call. So it'll subtitle the conversation in real time. It's intended for the hearing impaired, but I think there's a good use case as well. If you have people on your team where maybe English is their second language and they can read it better than they can listen to it, that might be an interesting feature. Or even for all of us, where sometimes you're on a long call and sometimes maybe you lose track and then you kind of lose your spot in the call. It might be nice having that transcription that you can revert back to and get caught up. Yeah, Teams has a quite sophisticated call flow functionality built into it as it relates to auto attendance and call queues. If you are a user and you belong to a call queue, this is where you would see the call queues that you belong to. The administrator can give users the ability to come in and out of the call queue. So right now I'm in the call queue. If I press this button, it will not route, the VIP group will not route calls to me because I've exited. This is an administrative setting. I've had clients that require this, and I've had clients that absolutely don't want it. And so it's really, you can configure it however you like it. But from a call flow design perspective, Teams is quite sophisticated. It's almost like a light contact center. So, think the auto attendant would be, thank you for calling Paragus IT. For support, press 1, right? So the thank you for calling Paragus is the auto attendant. For support, press 1. That support would be a call queue, the support call queue. The difference between a hunt group and a call queue is that hunt groups aren't able to stack callers in waiting. So traditional phone systems will typically always be able to configure a hunt group, but they won't be able to queue the calls. Teams can. So it can do up to 200, you can do anywhere from 1 to 200 callers queued in waiting. So let's say I have a call queue. Let's say it's the support team. Let's say I have 10 people in support and all 10 people are on the phone. When that 11th call comes in, you can configure it so that they stay in waiting until one of the 10 users becomes available and then present the call. And so you can throttle how many users you're willing to keep in queue waiting until you've overflowed to the next step. The next step could be an additional group. The next step could be a voicemail. So you can play with how many people are in the queue waiting. You can do up to 200. And you can also play with how long they're waiting until you overflow. So I think the minimum is 15 seconds and the maximum wait time is 45 minutes. And again, you would configure the settings that make sense for you, your environment, and your callers. The one thing that where Teams needs a little bit of help as it relates to being a contact center is the reporting. So there's some enhanced reporting that can fill the gap. If you needed, live dashboards telling you exactly how many callers were in the queue at that time so that you could add more agents to the call queue, there's some third-party products that would fill the gap for that. Great. So we've configured all of our settings as a user. Now it's time to go talk about the call functionality. So if you come over to calls, There's in essence, to deploy Teams, there's two elements that you need. You need to have the correct licensing with Microsoft, which is called the Microsoft 365 phone system license. And you need to have minutes, which is where Paragus IT will come in. You'll be able to procure minutes through Paragus IT through the direct routing option that Microsoft has. So once you've been configured, every user will get their own DID. You'll have a dial pad. You'll be able to, dial out. You'll be able to click to call. And the first tab is speed dial. So if you have delegates, the delegates will automatically show up in your speed dial. And then you can configure your own speed dial groups. You would click new group, add speed dial. You could add callers. You could do it from the history. This is also where you would retrieve parked calls. So in a minute here, we're going to place a live phone call, and I'll show you how parked calls works. But parked calls essentially is a centralized hold. So if I'm on a call and I put a caller on hold, I'm the only user in the environment that can resume that call. Conversely, if I park the call, Teams will give me a code. Let's just say code 10. I can then socialize that code, and then somebody can retrieve that call. So think of it like a staged transfer. If you transfer the call, you have to know who you're transferring to, and you're going to transfer it at that point in time. A park call allows you to stage the call while you identify where you want to transfer the call, and then you let that user pull the call back so you don't actually have to transfer it. So I'll give you an example where a park call may be useful. Let's say I'm the receptionist and a lead calls from off the internet. They have a question about one of my products. I'm the receptionist and there's 10 people in the sales department. Any one of those 10 people could answer that call, and I'm indifferent to who answers the call. I would park the call. It would give me the code. I'd jump on a chat in Teams. I would say, hey, sales team, I've got a lead on park 10. Can somebody please help the lead? And then I can forget about the call. If nobody retrieves the call after 5 minutes, it will boomerang back to the person that parked the call. But what's going to happen is somebody will jump on, grab the code, jump on, they'll jump here, they'll put the code in, and they'll pick up that call. And I'll show you how that works here in a minute. Contacts is the next tab. Again, it's fully integrated to your Outlook. So all of your contacts are going to come in. You can click to dial, you can chat, you can email, you can video, you can add to speed dial, you can remove the contact, right? Bunch of functionality. Call history. This is where all of the call history is going to be. Again, same functionality. I could call back, add to speed dial, I can block. And then lastly, voicemail. So voicemail is going to be retrievable in a variety of ways. The first way is through your inbox and your email. Microsoft will email you every voicemail. You'll get the original audio file attached to the email, and you will get a transcription of the message in the body of the email. Additionally, you can come to the desktop client like I am now, and you can retrieve your voicemail. This is what they refer to as visual voicemail. You can pick which voicemail you want to listen to in any order that you like. You don't have to go sequentially. So here it'll tell you who called. Here's where you hit play. You can listen to the voicemail. You can change the playback speed. This is the transcription of the call. And then I could do things like block, which I already have. This is a demo account, so these tend to be marketing calls. I've already blocked it. I could unblock it. I could add to contacts, call back, delete, mark as unread. The alternative way to get it would be through some alternative device that you're using Teams, like the Teams mobile app or the Teams desk phone. You'll be able to get your voicemails there as well. There's no PIN to check your voicemail. You authenticate through when you sign into Teams. And so it becomes really simple and easy for the users. So if you're experiencing users today that need their voicemail password reset, or they don't recall what it was, all of that goes away. It becomes this seamless integration that's very elegant and simple for the users to consume. Okay, great. We're ready to place a live phone call. So Sydney, who's on here, she's going to go ahead and call me. I've got my unique DID on the system. She's going to give it a ring, and then we'll go through it. I think I need to lower this. There we go. So Sydney's calling. If I hit the red button, it's going to reject it, and I can answer. Let's go ahead and answer Sydney's call. Great. So I'm on the phone with Sydney. You can see that it's its own window. So maybe I have a couple monitors. I can slide it over to the side. I could minimize it. I could expand it. Let's go ahead and expand it. So here it's showing me the caller ID of the person I'm talking to. Up here on the left, I have a timer. You can see I've been on the call for 16 seconds. But the majority of all the call control is going to happen right here on the top right. So I could exit the call with the big red button. I don't want to do that. I could mute the call. But let me show you the rest of the buttons. So there's a dial pad. Let's say I'm calling through an auto attendant and I need to dial 1 for that support team. This is where I would do it. This is where I would add. I could see the participants on the call, or I could add additional participants. I think you can add up to 250 participants on a call. So you get a large number. We'll do that last. I'll show you how that works. And if you come to the 3 dots, the ellipsis, you'll be able to find all the call control. So the first one is device settings. This is where you're going to configure your microphone and your speaker and your webcam. And then there's call health. So this is an interesting thing. It's new. It emerged maybe a week ago. And this will give you statistics on the quality of service for the audio, for the video. If you're screen sharing, you get a lot of data at your fingertips to help you identify how the call is performing. Here is where you would put the caller on hold. So let's go ahead and put it on hold. Sydney's now on hold. And again, I can minimize this. Now that she's on hold, I could resume from the call tab, or I could resume from the window. Again, when a caller is on hold, you are the only user that can resume the call. Nobody else can. Let's go ahead and resume the call. All right, great. Instead of putting her on hold, let's go ahead and transfer the call. So there's 2 versions of transfer. There's transfer and consultant transfer. Consultant transfer allows you to connect with the person you're going to transfer to, have a quick conversation, and then transfer the call. So it allows you, it gives you, it's like 2 steps in the transfer. Transfer is more of a direct transfer. So you could find somebody on the environment. I could transfer to somebody's cell phone or a landline, or somebody on the environment. Okay, I'm going to transfer to Nate. He's not actually logged in right now because it's a demo. And I could select ring back if there's no answer. So if I click on this, maybe I'm not sure if Nate's there, but if he doesn't answer, I want it to come back to me and not send the caller to the voicemail. I would enable ring back if there's no answer. If I just click transfer, it's going to go straight to Nate's Teams phone. However, there's some additional options. I could go to his voicemail. Maybe the person wants to talk to Nate. I know Nate's not in today. I'll send them to his voicemail to save them time going through the whole, ring process. Or if configured in the Active Directory profile for the user, their cell phone, I could transfer directly to his cell phone, which would be off net. We're not going to do any of those. We're going to look at consultant transfer. Let's go ahead and resume. Okay, let's look at consultant transfer. So it's very similar. Let's find Nate again. But this time you'll see the default isn't transfer, the default is chat. So I can chat with Nate, or I can elevate to actually an audio call. All the while, Sydney, who called me, is on hold. Let's go ahead and go to chat. Sydney's on hold. I'm not sure if Nate's available. If I want to check in with him before I send Sydney his way, make sure that Sydney gets a good experience with us. Nate, are you available? He's going to say a variety of things. He's going to say, you know what? I'm not available. Please patch Sydney to my voicemail. Then I would just come here, transfer straight to voicemail. He might say, you know what? Go ahead and patch her through. I'm ready to talk to her. I'll just hit transfer. Or he could say, I'm about to hit the road. I'm going to be in my car. Just send her to my cell phone. I could do that. I could send to his cell phone. We're not going to do any of those. Let's cancel out. And let's resume. Okay, great. Let's look at call park. So this time, I'm not sure who I want to transfer the call to. I need to figure that out. So I'm going to park the call. It says parking. I'm going to get a code. Code is 10. I can click copy the code if I don't want to necessarily remember it or have to type it again. So let's copy it and let's close out of here. So in the call tab, you'll see the park call. It says park. It gives me the code. And again, I could copy to clipboard. Now I can jump in that chat and I could say, hey team, I've got Sydney on park 10. Can somebody please, help her? Let's pretend I'm the person that's going to help her. Let's go to speed dial. Let's go to park calls and let's go ahead and type 10. Pick up.
Ricardo, I think we lost your screen share. Oh,
the screen share?
Now. It's coming now. It just froze for a second. You're good.
Chelsea?
I can see it just fine.
Yep, you're all set.
Yeah,
Sorry
I can
about
see
that.
it.
Oh, okay. No problem. Because it says it's still sharing. Okay, great. So we'll keep going. So I've now retrieved the call from Sydney from the call park. And the last thing I want to show you is how to add additional participants, because some interesting things happen when you add at least a third person on the call. So let's go ahead and add Nate. It's going to be interesting because the minute I try to add a third person, even if they don't actually answer the request, it's going to change the functionality of the call, and it's going to elevate it to something that's more like a Teams meeting than an audio call. So if you pay attention to the buttons up here, you'll see that it's going to all of a sudden give me chat and a bunch of other things. Let's go ahead and invite Nate. Okay, now Nate's not going to answer because Nate's not there. But now I've got chat, right? So let's say Sydney's a lead off the internet. I'm kind of new as a salesperson, so I don't want to lose the lead. I want the commission. So I'm going to ask Nate to help me with the call. I'm going to patch him in. Now Nate and I could be chatting unbeknownst to Sydney, who's on her cell phone. You're also going to get some functionality like raise your hand. So maybe I'm moderating a call that with 30 people on it, the raise your hand becomes useful. Let's go ahead and lower the hand. And then you're going to get some additional kind of interesting things. You're now going to get the ability to start a recording and turn on live captions. So the turn on live captions was that TTY mode I was telling you about. It's going to start to transcribe the conversation in real time. And I could also record the call. So sometimes I'll have clients say, hey, I'd like to record a call. How can you do it? And the answer is you can't do it today through a normal phone call. But if you add a third person to the call, that's currently the hack to make it happen. I believe that Teams will eventually provide the option on an audio call, but they haven't yet. And if you need to, this is the way you would do it. Just know that everybody will be notified that the recording has commenced. In Sydney's case, who's on her cell phone, she's not going to see the banner. There will be a voiceover that tells her on the call that the call is being recorded. And then, of course, you could do you could turn on background effects and do video and a variety of things. So Delcy, that concludes the demo, and I'm ready for any questions that anybody has.
That's great. So if you want to toss this or stop sharing your screen for a second, I'll take back over and then I'll just wrap up and then we'll go to questions. All right, share my screen again. All right, get this out of the way. Awesome. So thank you, Ricardo, for kind of walking us through that. Just by way of kind of a little bit of context. So the ecosystem that we're talking about here is Teams is the platform that we're talking about for communication. As Ricardo mentioned, though, there's a couple of other pieces to enable this. The next is bringing in the company that Paragus has selected to provide the voice carrier service, and in this case, Juxto. So Juxto is the company that Paragus has partnered with to provide the back-end actual dialing and phone system that makes all of this possible. And that's where Ricardo's from. Ricardo works for Juxto. And so just to tell you a little bit about Juxto and kind of how their network works, and Ricardo, feel free to chime in if I miss anything, but this kind of shows you the footprint of their network that they have built. Different call centers and hosts in different parts of the country to enable a very powerful multinational phone system where you're going to have a lot of redundancy in case there's ever a problem in one part of the world. And then this is a high-level, kind of somewhat complicated slide, but what this tells you is it maps out a little bit about how this is structured. You can see that what Juxto has done is partner with different carriers in different parts of the country and the world to be the actual carrier of the call. Because on a telephony system where you're using actual 10-digit dialing, there has to be carriers for that call. So you can see kind of who those are on the different East Coast and West Coast locations. And you can get a little bit of a sense of kind of how they have designed their network so that the calls are going to be routed to the different places and also ensure that there's a lot of redundancy so that at any given time, you're not going to have to worry about a system being down and not being able to receive or make phone calls. The other thing I want to show you is that Juxto has done two very powerful things. One, they have partnered with some of the biggest companies in the world when it comes to plugins and add-ons. So for example, many people on this call may already be using Salesforce. You might be using Microsoft Dynamics. Some of you might be using a call center like a Five9. Many of you may be using eFax as your fax solution. And what they have done is they've partnered with these companies to integrate those technologies into their solution in an incredibly efficient and seamless way. They've also added in SMS features that we haven't quite talked about yet today, but the ability to text people right from your Teams instance so that you're not only having a voice call with them, But let's say, for example, you're providing a lot of residential services and you want to be able to text directly to a customer to confirm an appointment or to remind them about a bill. You could be doing that from your text messaging through Teams. And you also could be receiving text messages if you're using that in a sales campaign or marketing campaign. So some very powerful features there. The other thing Juxto has done is they've designed their system in such a way that it's an open API. Meaning if there's an application, a system, a program that is not already integrated that we want to integrate into the phone system, we have tremendous ability, a capability to be able to do so. And that allows it to be a little bit of a customizable solution to fit into whatever organizational applications you're already using in your business. And before we move off this slide, Ricardo, anything in particular you'd highlight that I missed?
Well, I think one thing that I would comment is that we use the same carrier that Microsoft uses, which is bandwidth.com. And the reason that that's relevant is because of some augmented functionality that I don't believe the other carriers are up to speed with yet, such as the dynamic 911. Bandwidth through the relationship with Microsoft is at the forefront of the dynamic 911 functionality that Teams provides, which we haven't really talked about yet, but is important. And just the network is a carrier grade network that it would be analogous to a network that Verizon or Microsoft itself would have. And the efficiency really stems from that private layer connection into the manufacturers, peering at the highest level possible to really, with the focus is guaranteeing, a high level QoS.
Thank you very much. And the last thing we'll just kind of put, and I think Ricardo was actually just speaking about this, is kind of this carrier grade level of not only service, but also some analytics. Juxto is able to help provide Paragus and therefore provide you with different dashboards, metrics, information that we want to pull out of the system. And Ricardo mentioned that earlier, that a lot of that isn't yet native into Teams, but there are ways that we can work with Juxto to get access to that data and set it up, either using some native services or some third-party services. And then just a very strong focus on security, from kind of getting rid of robocalls and nuisance calls, but also doing a lot to prevent attacks like denial of service and fraud management, really helping to make sure that this system isn't only simple and easy, but it's also secure, which I know is on the forefront of all of our minds as we're looking at all of these different technologies and solutions. So kind of in closing, before we transition over to questions, a lot of people hear about these technologies, they get excited about these things, they attend webinars and they kind of wonder, well, where do I go from here? And we kind of get back to our busy lives and forget about it. So I just kind of want to map out how Paragus has kind of designed our services to address this. Historically, we have really stayed out of phone systems, and we've stayed out of them because they require a lot of specialty knowledge and expertise that we don't have. And that's why we decided that when we made the decision to get into it, we needed to partner with the right vendor. And that's why we have selected Juxto and why we're so happy with our partnership. They bring enormous amounts of expertise when it comes to the telephony side and the telco side that Paragus doesn't have the expertise in. Where we do have the expertise is in managing a Teams environment, managing a 365 tenant, and setting them up so that they're secure, so that your staff are trained, so that things are there, and so that you have the same vendor for support, so that you don't have to call one person when you're trying to get an extension added to your phone and somebody else when your Teams environment isn't turning on, but rather that single kind of one vendor solution to be able to address and handle all of your IT needs. And then if we ever need support, we're the ones calling Juxto on the back end rather than putting you in the middle of having to manage two different vendors and point fingers of whose system is actually incorrect or who didn't set something up the right way. And so if you are interested in learning more about this, it actually is quite a simple process. The first thing we do is you'd reach out and we put a quote together for you. And there's a relatively small amount of information that we need to be able to prepare that quote. There's maybe 10 or 15 questions that our team is going to ask you. And using that information, we can get you a fairly accurate picture of what your monthly charges and upfront one-time charges are going to be. And then from there, like most of the other solutions we offer, our role is really to be your Sherpa, to help you figure out how are we going to get this done, what's going to have to happen, what's the plan, who needs to know what, and how is that all going to get done on time, on budget, and done right. And this is typically what that migration timeline looks like. We finalize the quote so that everybody knows what this is going to look like when it's all said and done. Then we go through the process of designing your workflows and your auto attendance. And Ricardo talked about this a little bit, but you've got call queues, you have auto attendance, you have these things called resource mailboxes. We can enable Teams meeting rooms to have voice calling. We can set up breakout rooms in your office to be able to have phones that can dial out but aren't assigned to anybody. There's a lot that we can do to work with you to figure out what do you want this to look like? What is the feature and functionality? And to get all that figured out in advance. Then we're going to help you port your numbers. This is a question we get all the time from customers is, if I go with Teams, do I have to give up all of my phone numbers? And the answer is absolutely not. So we're going to work with you to port those numbers over to your Teams environment so that your same 800 number, your same public phone number, and even all of your employees' DIDs can be moved over into Teams, assigned to all the right places. And for your end users, your customers, your clients, their experience will feel the same. They'll call the same number. They may hear the exact same auto attendant if you have a recording that we can upload. For example, if you've ever called Paragus, we have kind of a famous Morgan Freeman phone tree. We obviously would not want to lose that when we move to Teams. So when we set up our Teams phone system, we were able to import all of those Morgan Freeman recordings, and there's like 26 different ones of them, and put them all into the right auto attendants and call queues and voicemail boxes so that we still maintain that personality and that fun in our new phone system. The next is we're going to identify and install any hardware. You know, as Ricardo and I mentioned, if you want a traditional desktop phone sitting on a desk, you can have one. If you have a meeting room where you just want a phone sitting on the desk to make conference calls, you can have one. If you want a very elaborate conference room with a camera that's mounted on the wall and audio sensors on the table, and it's a Teams room, meaning it can actually be added to the meeting and it can host the meeting for you, we can set that up for you. So we figure out what is that right hardware that you need. Maybe you just want some headsets. Maybe you just want to get a handful of people some great Bluetooth headsets that they're going to be able to use to make and receive phone calls. Any of those things will get addressed at that point. And then there's a testing and training phase. And I think, as Ricardo already pointed out, it's relatively minimal. If your users are already on Teams and using it for basically anything, they're going to find using it as their phone system is almost right on the border of self-explanatory. Once we set up the phone so the calls come to them, all they have to do is press accept call, and it's going to come into their headset or their desk or whatever it is that they're using. The more advanced stuff is the stuff that Ricardo showed you in the demo, and that's a lot of just user customization. How do you want your voicemails handled? Do you want anybody to be a delegate on your line? And those are things that are relatively easy to set up, as you saw in the demo. Once all that's going, we then switch over to go live. And one of the things that I really like about these projects, and if anybody on this call has ever done a voice project before, where they moved to a new phone system or they changed carriers, you'll know that the most scary moment in that process is the cutover. And it's scary because it's kind of all or nothing. You go from using an old system to go to using the new system all at one time. And it's a very steep, sharp cutover. And if anything goes wrong, you're just down until it's fixed. What I really like about these Teams projects is they can be phased in. We can get everybody set up. We can get the DIDs working. We can do trainings. We can get people comfortable. We could even start having people making outbound calls before we port over your numbers, which is when the inbound calls are going to start coming in. And for most people, because they're not going to get rid of their desk phone, they can leave that desk phone there while they're starting to learn Teams and get used to it. They can make their outbound calls from Teams, but take their inbound calls from their desk phone. It allows us to have a much kind of more smooth and deliberate migration plan. Not that we even need it because it is self-explanatory, but it takes the risk out and just makes the process feel more comfortable for everybody involved. And with that, we do definitely want to open it up to questions. I know somebody had already posted one, so why don't we start there? I'm going to stop my screen share. And feel free to unmute or post in the chat. Either is totally fine. So the first question was, we're using business voice to share with our property managers downstairs. How would it work if we're the only ones who want to use this feature? So we currently use common business voice to share with our property managers downstairs. How would it work if we only want to use that feature?
So I think
go ahead, yeah.
One of the nice things about Teams is that it's not all or nothing. So let's say you have 100 users in the environment. One user alone could be on Teams phone system. It doesn't require everybody. To take a step further, it could even be a hybrid between direct routing and Microsoft calling plans. So it provides maximum flexibility. And so I think what the question is, hey, we're using Teams. but not everybody in the environment would necessarily need the phone system. That is not a problem. We would just be selective as to which users, and you would only pay for those users.
That's perfect. Thank you, Ricardo. And the next question was, if what's the license cost, and is there an integration with existing PRIs? So we didn't talk about this on the call, but there is a way to set up what's called the session border control, which basically allows you to connect an on-prem phone system and integrate it with a Teams phone system. I think to Ricardo's point, you really have to evaluate what it is you're trying to accomplish, because what it may make more sense to do is just to migrate a couple of users over to Teams than to truly set up that full integration. Although that full integration is a possible thing and is something that certain customers will use, especially if they have a contract or some sort of time left on an existing phone system. What you won't really be leveraging for your outbound calls is your PRI. The PRI at that point, the outbound calls that you're using through Teams will go through Teams. Do I have that right, Ricardo?
Well, not necessarily. This does happen where a customer shows up and they're contractually bound to the. So by having a PRI, they are already buying minutes from an alternative carrier. So it is possible to bring your own carrier. We don't do it often, but it is possible. So we could set up the team, set up the direct routing, and instead of pointing to bandwidth, we could point to your PRI. We would have, it would require integration with the carrier, and we would have to might be some costs related to that, but it is possible. But generally, we've been able to find ways to kind of work the economics in a way that make it, palatable to just make the migration now. So the broad answer is yes, it's possible. The better answer is we should schedule a call, go through the specifics, and then identify the best way to tackle the problem.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I know that we were on our contract with PRI. We had 6 months left on it. And so we made the deliberate decision that for 6 months, it was better to just write out the contract than to go through the effort of getting it all configured and set up. And we're now in the process of transferring over to Teams because our contract is up. So I think one of the questions we'd want to look at in the call is how many more months we're talking about, 36 or 48. It might be worth trying to figure out how to make it happen. Less than 6, it's probably worth writing it out.
And what happens as well is you'll find, apples to apples, Teams is generally less expensive. So the savings may end up, mitigating the cost of the PRI. The bottom line is we just kind of need to look at it and we can figure out something that I think would work.
And Andrea, you also asked kind of what is the license cost? There's 2 components to the license cost. The first license comes from Microsoft, and that price is actually going to be variable because it's going to depend on what your Microsoft 365 licensing is now. For example, if your users are already using an E5 license, then there's almost no additional Microsoft cost to them. If they're using an E3 license, there's going to be one cost. If they're using one of the small business or business premium, it's going to be a different cost. So we would work with you to figure out what is your licensing package through Microsoft, and then what is the best option. We have some clients who, because they want a couple of other things, it actually makes more sense just to convert to E5 and to bundle everything together into one SKU and then not have to buy it separately. We have other clients where the only thing they need to add is Teams, and otherwise they're very happy, Teams Voice, and so we can just add that one SKU to your package. Microsoft is probably, some of has I think now 100 and something SKUs for their 365 platform, and we can mix and match and play with those. But that's the first cost, is there is some Microsoft component to this. The second cost is the minutes that you're buying, and this would be through Paragus via Juxto or through Juxto via Paragus. And right now, for most customers, that tends to be around $12 per user per month. At larger volumes, sometimes we can go down a little bit on that, but that tends to be roughly what you'd expect. And to Ricardo's point earlier, you can pick and choose. So maybe there's 10 people who are the hybrid users who are constantly on the road, and you really would like them to be on a Teams voicemail system or a Teams phone system. You could start with those people, sign them up for $12 per user per month, plus whatever the Microsoft cost is, and then you'd have that taken care of. And then the only other SKU that Microsoft charges is if you want to do a Teams meeting where you can have a conference bridge that users can call into who aren't going to use their computer and join over the audio, there is an additional license fee to add that call-in bridge, but you can get it just for the people who set up your Teams meetings. So maybe one receptionist schedules all external meetings that would need that bridge. That one user can have that license, and they can be the one that puts that bridge on that invite. There's a question about DIDs. It's a great question. So you actually have a tremendous amount of control over your caller ID. So when you're setting up the Teams environment, one of the questions that we would work with you on in your implementation is, what do you want that outbound caller ID to be? Do you want it to be the DID of the person who's making the phone call? Do you want to mask that and just have it be the company's main identification? There's a couple of different things we can do to create some policies and rules around what your outbound caller ID is going to look like. But under no circumstances is it going to be the user's cell phone number. And that's what's great about this is I can take my phone out, I can make a call, and either it's going to have my work DID or it's going to have my company phone number, but it's not going to have my cell phone number when I call that person. And that's one thing that a lot of people struggled with during the pandemic is they got their calls routed to them or forwarded to them, but when they wanted to make an outbound call, it ended up coming from their cell phone. And people are becoming more and more suspicious of random cell phone numbers calling them. So they found a lot of their calls weren't getting answered because people didn't want to take a random phone call. Plus, then that user has your cell phone and maybe they're calling you when you don't want them to. Also, when that employee leaves you, now that your customer has their cell phone number rather than your company number. So for all of those reasons, you can control the DID, and then that's going to be pushed out whether I'm using the phone, the computer, my mobile. It's all going to use that DID policy that we set up, our caller ID policy. Somebody asked, if a phone call is rerouted to a cell phone, will that be indicated to the caller or will it be private? Part of the reason to go to a system like this, our staff no longer share their personal cell phone numbers with clients. So that's what we were just talking about. It's invisible to the client. They're going to hear either hold music or ringing, and then they're going to be transferred and they're going to hear a voice, but they're not going to ever see that they have been transferred to a user's cell phone. Is that accurate, Ricardo?
That's accurate. Mm-hmm.
And then the last question, my favorite question, who can we reach out to if you're interested? If you are a current customer of Paragus, the person to reach out to would be your account relationship manager. If you're not a customer of Paragus, the best person to reach out to would be probably either Nikolai or myself. Nikolai, if you want to put your email address in the chat, that may be the easiest way for people to get in contact with you, and we can start the process from there. And Ricardo, another question is, can you tell us a little bit about how the security of this environment is set up and how these calls are secured?
So fundamentally, Microsoft uses a different protocol. So, VoIP is traditionally SIP, where Microsoft is not. Microsoft is TLS, and TLS is fully encrypted. And in addition to the encryption, it brings a variety of benefits that SIP struggles with. So, especially now, in a COVID era, SIP is notoriously difficult for remote workforce. There's a lot of challenges with the routers. SIP ALG has to always be disabled, and it's just problematic. And it's difficult to ensure QoS. Teams, by way of using TLS, and just by virtue of the importance of Microsoft, as a player in the world, the ISPs themselves are worried about their peering relationship with Microsoft. And so between the TLS protocol and between the significant peering that Microsoft has with the ISPs, the experience from a QoS perspective for a remote workforce is substantially better than SIP. I mean, there's just no comparison. But Microsoft is fully encrypted through that TLS encryption.
And then there was another question that popped in. Is this system HIPAA compliant for voicemail? Do you happen to know the answer to that, Ricardo?
Well, so the issue is whether somebody can retrieve the voicemail, right? And catch somebody's, personal information. I want to say it is, but I'm hesitant to give you an answer that I'm at 100% sure of. Microsoft is incredibly focused on telehealth and the healthcare space in general. So, my belief is that it is, but, I would have to double check that just to make sure that I'm being, and voicemail is always the one area that challenges HIPAA compliance. I'd have to just double check, but it should be.
Yeah, and some of that's going to also depend, I think, on how you have it configured. For example, if Teams is emailing you a copy of your voicemail and what you're doing with that email. If you're forwarding that email off to a Gmail address or checking it on a non-secure device, then you have probably diminished some of that HIPAA protection. But I believe that natively, everything is being stored in a TLS encrypted environment.
Yeah.
So when you're on the Teams app, you're definitely TLS encrypted. The voicemail is definitely in the cloud in an encrypted environment. I think it would really come down to probably the last mile of your configuration of what you're doing with that voicemail beyond checking it in the app.
That's a great point, Delcy. And you can disable the voicemail to email if you had to. So
yeah, I think that would probably be the only thing that I would have questions about. And I think to your point, it could always be turned off if that was the concern. Any other final questions before we wrap up? I want to make sure we're respectful of the time.
Yeah, I have a question. And this is more about the audience that of the employees where this would be implemented. So in our environment, many people are not very technically adept, shall I say. That's probably an understatement. So two questions come to mind. Is there a simplified short-term version that you can use during an implementation period before layering on all the other features, number one? And number two, is there an admin type function that can limit the ability of users to make changes to their own setup?
Yeah, so I think I'll speak to both, and then Ricardo, if I missed anything, please feel free to add. I'll take the kind of second question first. There are a number of things that we can do in what's called the Teams Admin Center, which is where a lot of these configurations are set up. So Asparagus being the MSP, what we do is we log into the Teams Admin Center, and that's where we build the call queues, the call auto attendance, a lot of the things. And we do have the ability to control some of the features that end users have. For example, Ricardo showed earlier, if I'm in a call queue called sales, and my phone is supposed to ring every time there's a sales call, I can decide as an admin whether or not I want to let this user opt in or opt out of those phone calls, turn that feature on or off. So that's one example. There's a couple of other ones where you can put some limitations or controls around what the end users can do. On the first question of kind of the phased rollout, I think probably the easiest way to do that is to start with outbound calls. And so without porting numbers, without kind of becoming, I would say, dependent on the Teams voice system, a good way to pilot it or to start to practice with it is we turn it on for outbound phone calls so that your staff can go in and start practicing dialing. They can copy and paste phone numbers from websites or pages or emails that they're on, and they can start getting comfortable making a phone call using a computer instead of a desk phone. Once they've been doing that for 30 days, at that point, the idea of having their incoming calls come in tends to be very, very easy to understand and accept. And even at that, while you're in that first kind of 30 days, they'll have a DID. And if they want to give that DID to some people to practice taking calls, they can also do that before fully being dependent on their incoming calls coming in that way. And then within the Teams interface itself, there are a lot of tools that you can use to limit the buttons, the bubbles, the speeches, the notifications. A lot of that outside of the calling can be controlled by the admin. So if you're even new to Teams and you want to simplify that Teams interface down, there is a lot you can do to just kind of minimize what the user sees in the beginning. Did that answer your question, Wayne?
Hey, Dusty, I'm having an audio problem. I'm not sure if you can hear me, but.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I lost quite a bit of the last part.
Okay, I wasn't sure if it was me or if it was Delsey. You can hear me, right, Wayne? It sounds like it might be Delsey.
Yeah, Wayne, can you hear me now?
As technology challenged. Here's what I found. My preference is always to deploy Teams with a headset and a computer. However, having said that, I have found that some of the more technology challenged users, especially maybe some of the older users, may fare better with a physical phone with actual buttons on the phone that they're used to. So that would be one strategy that you could employ. If they were using the system, they just didn't like it, we could give them a physical phone with buttons. But generally, my focus when I transition a new client, I don't generally focus on the technology challenged users as much as I focus on the receptionist and the admins. And so in my experience, they're always the ones with a heightened sense of insecurity or anxiety with a migration, because, in fairness to them, they field the majority of the calls. They're bearing the brunt of the incoming call volume. And so if we pay special attention to the receptionist and any executive admins, and we give them plenty of training and plenty of time before we go live, that usually is enough. I don't have a lot of situations where we went live and the users, just couldn't figure it out, especially when we catered intentionally to the users that bear the brunt of the majority of the incoming calls. And so, Delsey's perspective was perfect, right? We could start with outgoing, then they could selectively give incoming their number for incoming and slowly transition them. But the transition to Teams, in my experience, is very quick. It's relatively intuitive.
Any other questions before we let everybody go? All right. Well, I want to thank you guys again for tuning in. We really appreciate it. As we mentioned, if you want to learn more about this, if you want to get a quote just to see what it would look like, you can either reach out to your account relationship manager, or Nikolai did put his email address in the chat. Feel free to email him directly and he can get you in touch with the right person. I want to thank Ricardo for being here today and for being our partner in this. I will say that Juxto has been a tremendous partner to work with. While you guys call us for support, we can call them and make sure that at the end of the day, the issue gets solved quickly. And they have been great at doing both of those things. So thank you, Ricardo. Thank you, everybody. And hope you guys have a great rest of your week.
Bye. Thanks, everybody. Bye.